We need more books in here. Scott and John's shelves are intimidating.
They're all fake books. We could just knock off the plastic fronts and they all fall down.
No, there are backgrounds like Jeff's got.
Yeah, which one do you pull to open the secret room?
I can assure you that we don't pull any of them.
Oh.
We all have allergies to old paper dust. No better place to get it than in a law book.
Secret room.
Chuck, how's the senior center? We can't hear you, Chuck.
It's lonely. It's a big room.
Good. Dan's running late. He just texted me. I was going to close the doors, but they don't exist yet. I'm broadcasting live from 2 milk crates in the future side of our meeting desk area. There's carpet on the floor though, so that's good.
Did you get a haircut though?
I did.
Wow.
Thanks, Alderman Chevalier, for noticing.
Wow.
This one guy kept telling me he was going to use COVID funds to get a haircut for me, so didn't want that happening. If it wasn't for COVID, I would have let somebody, everybody pay a couple bucks to shave a piece, but we didn't do that. All right, it's 5:01. Linda, can we get started?
You want roll call?
Yeah, let's go ahead and do a roll call.
Alderman Atkins.
Present.
Alderwoman Wilson.
Here.
Alderman Blumker.
Here.
Alderman Chevalier.
I am here.
Alderman Sarver.
Here.
And then Uladall is not here yet.
Correct. Stays about 5 minutes behind. All right, let's kick it off with the 2020 tax rate update.
Okay, good evening, board and mayor. I included a staff report. Walk through this kind of real quickly. The big key date is that we have to file it with the counties by September 1st. In order to meet that deadline, the county has to issue us what are called post BOEs. We usually get those late July or early August. We have to publish in the paper or in 3 places of general circulation in the city, 7 days prior to a prior to a public hearing, and then we have to have 2 readings. We received what are called pre-BOE letters last week, so we have some assessed value information that I've included in my staff report. However, I think the biggest key to me is it is highly unlikely that we will have the post BOE information in order to do a first reading on August 4th and a second reading on August 18th. So if we're lucky, we'll be able to do an emergency first and second reading on the 18th, but even that might be pushing it a little bit. So I would like to set aside a date to have a potential special meeting in late August, the later the better probably, that we can meet just to have the public hearing and the emergency ordinance for first and second reading of that tax rate. So maybe you guys can talk about that a little bit after I finish here for a second. Back to the pre-BOE AVs. I've provided the last 3 years history in my staff report. The change from 2019 to 2020 in that assessed value is 3.8%. And I do want to note that the Clay County has an adjustment on our pre-BOE for the TIF those parcels that make up the TIF, their assessed value over and above what they were at the time the TIF was established gets deducted out of our assessed values because those property taxes go back to the TIF. So I wanted to highlight that so you can see what that assessed value looks like, or what the deduction of that assessed value looks like. And then I included 3 years of history for the post BOE. You can see that it increased somewhere, middle of 4.5% each of the last 3 years. So we're anticipating something similar this year, and I've included that in graph form as well. So if you have any questions about the physical numbers, feel free to ask me. Otherwise, I'd ask you guys just to talk a little bit about setting that special date in late August.
Cool. Any questions for Dan?
Pretty much standard operating procedure at this point, right?
Alderman Blumker, do you have any anniversaries or birthdays in August that we need to avoid?
I will let you know, but thank you for making sure my birthday is most excellent this year and the prior year.
Does anybody have any conflicting dates? And when is school supposed to start? The 24th? So
I will be gone the last week of August.
the 24th through the 28th or the 31st?
Yes, yes.
So do we want to just go ahead and throw it on the calendar for the 31st? Okay. Does that get us where we need to be, Dan?
Yeah, that'll work fine for me. I'll have to take it to the counties the next morning, but that shouldn't be an issue at all.
I mean, either that or we meet on Saturday. I mean,
I think the 31st is fine. Do we want to do that at a 7 o'clock or a 5:30 or?
5:30.
And again, I'll try to, if the information comes to us in a manner where we can do it on the 18th, we'll do that. If not, we'll have this August 31st at 5:30 p.m.
Sounds good. Any other questions or discussion on tax rates? All right, moving on to schedule of fees.
Okay, I included in the packet a small staff report on the schedule of fees. Really two changes we're looking at. The first one is regarding a police fee for obtaining a copy of a video. We currently offer that in one of two ways, either a link to the video in the cloud or on a physical USB. And in the past year, the USBs haven't been requested very often. They're a little time consuming. The cloud links are working great. And the cloud links also allow us to keep that contactless solution with COVID in our lives now. So staff is making a recommendation that we remove the USB option and only offer those video reports as a cloud link. The second recommendation from staff is regarding municipal court fees. Those are still listed in our schedule of fees. We transferred our municipal court to Clay County back on January 1st of 19. When we had this conversation last year, we didn't know, we were only 9 months in, we didn't know what effect pulling those out of our schedule of fees might have. But we feel confident now that we're 18 months in, we don't need those in our schedule of fees anymore. So we can make the document a little smaller if we remove all those. If you have any questions about those, I can answer them, Chief can answer them. I'll pause there in case you guys do before we get to Jack's part. Hearing nothing, one item that's a little bit tangential to schedule of fees is an item regarding payments in lieu of dedication of land for recreation. It's not part of the schedule of fees because the specific fee amount is listed in our ordinance. But I'll go ahead and let Jack provided a memo, but I'll go ahead and let Jack talk about that one real quick.
Sure. As you can tell from the memorandum, Mayor Boley requested that staff come up with a potential resolution to the inequities to all units of dwelling units when they're constructed, and not just I guess not just single family developments through the subdivision ordinance. I proposed some language that could go into the comprehensive schedule of fees. And John Reddick has been working with us to figure out the best way to implement that if the board wants to go that way. It appears as though the building permit fee version may not work legally. It may need to go into the subdivision ordinance itself. But ultimately for today, the real question is, do we want to try to equalize that scenario such that all dwelling units provide some assistance, new dwelling units provide some assistance for the park improvements that will be created as a result of the new housing, or exactly how do you all want to do this? At the end of the memorandum, I've given you some examples of other communities and how they're looking at it. Some of them go as far to put it onto industrial and commercial subdivisions as well. So ultimately, I think all the options are on the table. It's not really a question of whether we can do it, it's how we can do it. We already have some of it in place, and I'd leave it up to John to help craft something that sets the standards you want us to try and get to. If you have any questions, I'll go from there.
Linda, did you get that Dan Alderman Ulidoll arrived?
Yep.
So just to add on to what Jack said, I asked to look into this because we have a lot of large lot subdivisions coming in during the comprehensive plan and the strategic planning process. We've talked about multifamily. We've seen more commercial development. All those have impacts on our park system. One of our main pillars coming out of the planning was improvements to parks and trails. And our voters spoke in the election and said yes to a sales tax for parks and trails. So with that, I'll open it up. Just raise your hand and I'll call on whoever I see first if you have any comments. Alderman Wilson.
I think we do need to look at leveling that across, for sure, maybe more the multifamily that may be coming. I don't know about commercial necessarily, but I would think we'd really want to look hard at leveling that across other new developments.
Yeah, and Jack, correct me if I'm wrong, but also developments like Brandywine Cove or Whiskey Ridge, they don't pay a parks fee either, correct?
Correct. If they are zoned Ag A1 with 10-acre lots, or if they're zoned AR, they're in the agricultural districts, and the current version says residential only.
And
so,
if any of you have been to those subdivisions, they're not raising cattle and horses. They are family homes with people that use the park system. So I understand why it was that way in the past, but not a lot of cattle being dropped in Whiskey Ridge right now.
although the street is Cattle Ranch Road, but
It is, yeah. We might get a few stray cows over in Brandywine Cove. You know. Anybody else?
Mr. Mayor, echo the sentiments of the senior alderwoman from the first ward. I think she nailed it well. You know, our voters spoke, and the our constituents clearly spoke through the process and that this is a priority. So I would encourage staff to find a solution, bring it forward so we can level things out.
Sounds good. Any objections? I see a lot of head shaking, so I think we're good. So, Jack, it sounds like, move forward with the residential type dwellings, and I don't know, maybe throw a proposal, an option A on what it would look like for commercial industrial as well.
Yeah, and this will have to go through the planning commission either way.
Yeah.
So we'll take it through there and they can do some vetting there.
Sounds good. Anything else from Jack or Dan on schedule of fees? All right, Dan, your head is in the exact right spot right now. Making the O and home. All right, revenue, back to you.
Yes, so again, provided a staff report in the packet for tonight. And it begins with a chart of our revenues by source, what we budgeted, where we are year to date as of June 30th, a projection for fiscal year 20, and a fairly raw number for what we're thinking fiscal year 21 might look like. So I'll tackle each one of these with a little bit of detail, but while we're looking at the chart as a whole, I do want to point out a couple things. So under franchise taxes, that $875,000 budget includes taxes. One of the franchise taxes that is in that $875,000 is a franchise tax that our utility pays. So it's basically a transfer that we do from our water fund over to the general fund. And in the audit last year, they suggested that instead of calling that a franchise tax, we just treat it as a transfer. So the projection for those franchise taxes has that $703,000 number. So it looks like we're falling really short. But if you go all the way down to the last line before the totals, there's that transfers in, where we budgeted 0 and the projection is 184,000. That's the utility franchise fee. So that 184 plus the 703 is 875 or 877. So we're a little bit over budget when you compare both of those together. The purpose of this review is mostly to investigate how COVID-19 is having an impact on our revenues. So in property taxes, those are billed every November. They're due in December, and we receive most of the money in January and February. There's a little bit that trickles in each month outside of those 2 months, but primarily those are received in January and February. The money that we've collected so far, that $881,000, that represents about 97% collection. And historically, we've improved over the last few years from about 85% to more than 99% last year. However, with COVID potentially having financial impacts on residents or property owners, we don't anticipate that the collection for the rest of this year is going to approach that 99 or 100% rate. So the projection of 889,000, that represents 98%. So about 1% more than what we currently have year to date coming in these last few months. The real question here is how might COVID affect people paying their property taxes this coming December 2020. And right now, that budget figure of for next year of 886,000, almost 887,000, we've used the current pre-Board of Equalization assessed value numbers, which multiplied by that 4.2% increase. So a little bit on the conservative side on those assessed value figures. We've assumed this point that our property tax rate will stay the same, and we've dropped our collection rate down to 92%. So that's what we're using right now to look at property taxes for next year. And we associate that dip from 98% to, or really 99% last year to only 98 this year to 92 next year as a COVID effect. Any questions on property taxes? The next line is sales and use taxes.
Wait a minute, Dan, I had my hand raised.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
How did you land on 92?
An educated guess, to be honest with you. We know it, we believe it's going to fall. It's going to decrease. It's hard to know how far it might go. I've had conversations with our financial advisor, Todd Goffey. I've had some conversations with Gilmore and Bell, although that doesn't really, we didn't get too much into projected collection rates. But we think it's going to fall to a point where it was back in 07, 08, 09, when our economy was going through all that, which we were looking at those rates, not so much for Smithville, because we don't really have a ton of that data from 12 years ago, but more so in the Kansas City metropolitan area. And we were looking at about 92%.
Okay.
Dan, what was the number?
Down to 90.
Yeah, so, sorry, go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
I just wondered about going down to 90 instead of 92.
Yeah, it's just a more conservative number. So I can surely move it down to 90. And when we talk budget in August, it'll be presented at 90% rate, and then we can look at that.
That's just my.
You know what our lowest number was since 2000? We've had a couple of dips in the last 2 decades.
The data that we have goes back to 13.
Okay. Alderman Wilson, do you have something else?
Yes. Would the county be able to tell you? If you
I will reach out to them. I'll reach out to them.
Okay.
Okay. The next section is sales and use taxes. Our budget was $1.5 million. And just as a kind of aside, from last year to this year, we assumed a 2% growth in sales and then a small incremental amount for sales from the TIF district. To date, we're at just over $1 million in sales revenue. And I've included some information here on a graph really about our sales tax revenue by month. And really you can see that it does closely mirror what it was last year in each of those months. Our collection for March was just a tiny bit less than what it was in 19, but all of the other months so far, the actual revenue distributed to us that month from the state is higher than what it was in 2019. Then the next graph shows when you take that data and instead of looking at it by the month the state sent it to us, let's look at it as the months that the businesses reported sales. And that's that second graph. So you can see in here I included 2018 data and 2019 data. You can see 18 and 19 kind of have the same trends as we move from November through October. When you look at our 20 data, in November, we were kind of right in between where we were in 18 and 19. Our December's way up, our January's up, Our February falls right back in the middle of those 2 years. Our March is up, and our April looks like it's way down. Now, I will say that I can see in our reporting how many businesses we have registering sales and how much have reported for each of, how many businesses have reported for each of those months. So that November, December, and January data, it's pretty much 100% of what businesses can report sales for those months have already reported sales for those months. So those 3 data points aren't going to change much, if any. When you look at that February data point that falls right in between where it was in 18 and 19, that represents 88% of businesses reporting. So that data point, when we collect that last 12%, will increase, or we'll move higher on that chart. When you move to March, we're already above where we were in 18 and 19, but that data point only represents 82% of businesses reporting. And then that dip that it looks like happens in April, that April data point is only 53%. So that data point's still going to move way higher than what it is right now. And the last thing I want to point out here is that, you know, we don't even have data for May or June sales yet. Those businesses, or at least the reports that get sent to me from the state, don't include sales for May and June yet. So we're still awaiting that. We usually receive our money from the state around the 15th. The reports from the state, sometimes they're a little bit early, and you know, back in April, it showed up on the 8th, which was great. Last month, it showed up on the 30th. So we don't really know when those reports are always going to come, but I check it about once a week to see if they're available for me to download. But in short, our sales data for the year does not seem to have had a huge impact from COVID. Now, that being said, there are certain businesses that certainly have taken a hit. There are other businesses that, due to just the nature of what they do, their sales might be a little bit higher than what they normally are. But when you average all of that out, our sales tax revenue, what we're seeing, falls in line really pretty closely with that 2% projection that we had made for fiscal year 20. So at this point, now, you know, we have all of, you know, 90% of February's data, 90% of March's data, half of April's data, and it really doesn't look like we are going to have a huge impact from loss of sales in Smithville due to COVID right now. So the projection this year is that we're going to continue to see kind of that small growth that we have been seeing, and that projected number is that 1,550,000. I included then after that the same kind of information for use tax, which is a little bit more volatile, and also with use tax, you know, use tax is things that are delivered to people's doors. So there are a lot of businesses that do that sort of thing, and some of them may see sales in one month and not in another month. And unfortunately, I cannot tell when I look at that data if a business has reported $0 in sales for a certain month, or if they just haven't reported for that month yet. So it's, the data isn't super clear on what I'm seeing until, you know, 3 months from now, when I'm looking back at June, surely those businesses should have reported for June by then. But right now, whether people have reported $0 sales for April, or they just haven't reported for April yet, I can't tell the difference, so I don't know. But I've given you those charts for that same data, so you can see our revenue by month, and then when you actually extrapolate that out by the months that it was reported for. So go ahead, I'll stop here. Is there any questions about sales and use tax that I can answer? And keep in mind, I put that little note right at the beginning in my staff report that When I ask for this data, I basically sign a pledge saying that I won't discuss any certain businesses' sales or use tax in a public setting. So I can't get too specific, but if there's some general questions, we can surely address those. So are there any questions on sales and use tax?
Alderman Yulidol.
Just to try to generalize it, what type of business would not report sales at any given time? I know I have to turn mine in a certain time each month.
A lot of businesses are quarterly.
Yeah, so some are quarterly. You're going to fall into one of three categories. You either have to report monthly, quarterly, or annually. So that's mostly on like the sales tax side. And those are pretty consistent businesses because they're either here or they're not here, they've closed, and we know whether or not they're open, what to expect from those businesses. The use tax pieces, that's the one where it's a little bit different. You know, if there's a company in St. Louis that might deliver to my house in Smithville, I might only order from them every other month. So they're only going to show up on that report every other month.
We also have businesses that, not so much this summer, but in the past, we have had businesses that are seasonal that only report during those months. Anybody else? I don't see any other hands.
Okay. That next line is franchise taxes. I've talked about that one a little bit yet, but I will touch on that draft 21 budget number and the projected decrease from 703 to 681. We've seen a pretty general decline in franchise taxes over the last few years. These are things like people moving away from having cable service at home or home phone service, which isn't a surprise. So we see a general decline in that. So the fall off between what we're projecting for 20 and the budget for next year, that's a normal fall off. That's not related to COVID. Other taxes, that's fuel tax, motor vehicle fees, and road and bridge tax. We have not seen any fall off in those distributions as they've come in to us. Licenses, fees, and permits, we have seen a fall in this source category. Our building permits are down. The physical dollar amount of revenue has been offset a little bit. It doesn't look like the fall's been that hard because there are commercial building permits that have come in specifically with the TIF that are pretty substantial dollar amounts. So the year-to-date revenue that we've collected includes those large permits. So it doesn't look like we've taken a very large financial hit, but count-wise, we're very down. And we can think that trend might continue on into fiscal year 21, which is why you see a decrease from what we're projecting this year to next year's budget as well. In the intergovernmental revenue, this is our police grants and our SRO reimbursement from the school. And of course, once school closed due to COVID, we weren't supplying those police officers to them. So we stopped requesting reimbursement. So we've got a loss of revenue in that category. And as of right now, we're anticipating that's going to return to normal for next year. But if school does not start on time or we're not providing those services because they're doing it online or things like that, we'll have to adjust that expected revenue number as well.
Just a second, Dan.
Sure.
I want to talk about that just a second. When do we reach out to the school about them wanting the second SRO and if they're going to supplement that? I know right now we're paying 100% for the second one.
I'll let Cynthia answer that one. I don't know if she's already met or she has a meeting coming up.
Well, I meet on a monthly basis with Dr. Schutz, and he's indicated a desire to continue the SRO relationship. We have not discussed at what funding level. I can broach that again with him at what point we want to look at reducing that level.
I think we need to do that. I think it got by us last year and we didn't really talk about that. So I want to make sure we at least have that discussion this year.
Okay. Is there a level at which, one of the things that we've talked about is looking at, because we kind of are operating under a couple of different scenarios with our two SROs and trying to bring those so that they are the same agreement for operations. Is that what would be the desire of the board? And we can bring that forward in greater detail as well.
Well, that would be my desire as a board member. I don't know about others, but I think we really need to have a really serious discussion about that.
Okay.
I would agree with that. I think, meet with them, find out what you can and bring back, and we'll look at all options.
Okay.
I think we have a joint board meeting scheduled for August again, don't we?
Have to look at that, but I think that's typically been the time frame.
But the question is, when do they set their budget? Aren't they like July 1st?
It's already
June?
set. It's
Yeah.
set here.
They've said it already.
Yeah, and with the continued struggles they're having right now with funding, we have it budgeted for this year right now. So I think we could look at it as a mid-year thing for next year's budget. They've started having budget discussions for next year. So if we cover it November to when their budget year starts, I don't have any desire to get rid of a second SRO, regardless of the funding right now. Anyone else? Comments?
Yeah, I think part of that turns into a budget discussion for us on what type of law enforcement complement do we need and where they're located and what are they called and what do they do.
Yep. Anybody else? I don't see any hands. Watching the Hollywood Squares here. Okay.
Okay, I'll move on to the next source category, which is charges for services. This category is mostly centered around our parks department. So the budget is just shy of 235,000 and the projection is 175,000. And that change really encompasses two things. It is the spring and summer youth and adult recreation programs that we canceled, and the delay of the opening of the campground from April 1st to June 1st. At this point, we are planning for those to resume normal operations for next year.
So month to month, are we up on the campground for the time we have been open?
So
From
it's going to be a little bit not very clear to see that, because when the campground's open, typically when the campground opens on June 1st, that's our highest grossing day because everybody calls on June 1st and books all the way out through the summer.
April 1st, right?
Sorry, April 1st and books all the way out through the summer. So similarly, June 1st, we had the same thing happen this year. So our June revenue is going to look a lot higher than June of last year.
Well, I know Matt has numbers on day-to-day occupancy of the campground.
I'm with you now. I'm going to be honest. I don't have that data with me for today, but I can certainly put it together for you.
Okay.
And Matt does have that information, and he provided to me, and I have not had a chance to delve into it. I know our numbers. We have been booked a number of nights and most weekends recently, and compared to 18 and 19, and Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe we are consistently up. We, as Dan indicated, we will get that information to you all.
That's one that we could make up the revenue on I get it with sports, but we weren't really, sports wasn't a revenue generator. It was a revenue expense in and out. So
Well, and one thing to think of on the sports side, we had purchased some uniforms and had made some expenditures, but not a lot. And all of those can be reused as we proceed in the fall. We did have some expenditure in the campground. We did bring on the camp hosts, even though we didn't open the campsite. And they did assist with some of the renovation work that you saw in the city manager's report, which I'll talk to a little bit in the regular session, but they've also provided significant assistance on kind of monitoring, patrolling the Smith Fork area throughout the COVID shutdowns and have helped clean up in those areas when there have been significant numbers through there, particularly on weekends. Matt, if there's anything you want to add.
Yeah, on the campground side, the first week we were open in June, we sold out, and then 2 weeks later was 4th of July, which we sold out as well. So I would say numbers have been up in the campground from previous Junes, but hopefully that trend stays that way. So it's been exciting to see.
Yeah, and I'll just reiterate that Cynthia is absolutely correct. The loss of revenue associated with youth and adult recreation programs, there's a similar savings from not having expenditures for running those programs on the expense side as well. So that is a wash.
So one thing we haven't spent much time on over the last few months, I know at one point we had let the campground be available to people that needed to quarantine. Did we have many takers on that?
We had 2 campers. We have one there currently still.
Okay.
He's doing 12 weeks. He started right beginning of June. So he'll be there through June and July. I think he's planning to leave early August.
Okay, thank you. Dan, anything else on revenue?
I got a couple more real quick that we'll go through. Fines and forfeits is the next category. This is related to our court revenue from Clay County. Clay County canceled the March and April court dates. Cases that were on those dockets are being rescheduled. However, we're not going to catch up with that. It's not like they're going to have double the cases in June or anything like that. So we'll see that those cases kind of catch up over time, but it's going to take a little bit of while to do that, especially as they're implementing some precautions as it relates to COVID and not scheduling quite as many cases per docket and things like that. So at this point, we've seen a loss of revenue in this year due to those 2 months being canceled, but moving forward, we expect that to return to normal as well. And then our interest category, we have seen our rates drop significantly. So we budgeted 150,000. We've moved that down to 113. And then we anticipate that those are not going to recover for next year. So the budget for next year is only 42,000 as it relates to interest.
Is that just is that the fund outside of the CDs? Because we moved some into some interest bearing.
That accounts for the CD interest as well. So those CDs that we took out, I believe 2 of them come due in August or September, and then the other 4 of them come due in January or February. So that 42,000 includes the revenue from those CDs too.
But we could have taken a bigger hit, right?
We could have taken, if those were not locked up in CDs, we would have taken a much bigger hit, yes. And then 2 other things I'll point out real quick. If you go back to the chart on the staff report, that first page, in the other revenue, that year-to-date number has 946,000. That is where temporarily the CARES distribution is parked. So later today, assuming that fund gets established, we will transfer that revenue from that line to CARES fund. So that'll go away. And then the last thing I'll talk about here is, so our fiscal year 20 revenue budget was that 4,545,000, and the projection right now is 4,471,000. So that's a loss of about 74,000 in total. On the operational side, The projected expenditures for the year is just over 4,400,000. So we're still looking at a revenue over expenditures amount of about $62,000 or $63,000. So there is a little bit of room to discuss something. If we didn't want to just, if we don't do anything, that 62 or 63 will just go into our cash balance. Or we could look at doing something with that money. And there are a couple suggestions that staff might have, but we can talk about those at a later date. So in general, any questions about revenues? And if not, then I'll turn it over to Nikki for the fleet discussion.
All right, go for it.
Okay, good evening. Can you hear me okay? I haven't presented via Zoom yet from my house, so hopefully this all goes well.
You need a better background or something, you know.
I know, it's pretty boring. It's either that or toys, so I think this is slightly better. Well, just as a reminder, we've been really talking pretty extensively about fleet for the past couple of years. You all really challenged Cynthia very early in her time to take kind of a deep dive into fleet. And so last year, we brought to you all about a year ago, a pretty exhaustive review of our existing inventory. So we presented you all with the list of kind of vehicles by department, by item, along with our equipment, and did a pretty good job with you all under your direction of kind of reviewing what could be shared, what could be surplus, and had a pretty good amount that we actually ended up selling last year and repurposing. So that was a really good kind of first step to getting our house in order and really getting a good comprehensive view of our own inventory, just to really understand what we had before we decided to look into what our options were. So kind of what we've been doing for this past year is really kind of revisiting that list. Number one, we brought Chuck on board. And so with his background in public works, definitely appreciate his experience kind of overseeing different fleet divisions at several different organizations. We've revisited our list again, and of course have been continually discussing the option of leasing vehicles, which is one option that came up from you all last year. And so that's really a lot of what we want to talk about tonight, is have Enterprise present to you all what their fleet leasing and fleet management looks like. We believe it's a really good fit. And so would like you all to have a discussion and really get all of your questions answered directly from Enterprise. And at the same time, I've put together kind of a funding option for how we believe different scenarios of how we can keep up with our fleet replacement going ahead in the future. So with that, you know, before we turn it over to Enterprise, definitely want to make it pretty clear that what we're discussing tonight really only addresses a portion of our fleet. So, you know, we have 120 pieces of equipment and 45 of which are vehicles. What isn't included in this lease are those pieces of equipment. So any of the heavy duty like dump truck or the mowers, plows, spreaders, those kind of various equipment, those will in the future be addressed in our vehicle and replacement fund if it gets established, but wouldn't be included in a lease program. And the other really important item that tonight's discussion doesn't include are our patrol vehicles. So basically our police vehicles that respond to calls. And Enterprise can talk a little bit about that, but really those are kind of replaced because of the high mileage in organizations on a pretty different schedule than the rest. So it's really kind of recommended per best practices that we address those really as kind of their own bucket. So we will discuss, you know, the equipment and the patrol vehicles as part of the budget process this year, but really just wanted to make sure everybody was clear that tonight really focuses on our non-patrol white fleet, which is basically your everyday vehicles, of which we are recommending that we proceed with kind of putting 27 into this fleet management model. So we ready to kind of turn it over to Brandon from Enterprise, or do anyone have any questions about where we are so far? Okay, if not, take it away, Brandon.
Okay. Thank you, Nikki. Good evening, everybody. Brandon Scott, been with Enterprise for 12 years. I'm from Kansas City originally, grew up in Independence, currently live in Lee Summit, went to Mizzou, graduated from there, and have relocated 6 times with the company, area manager, a couple different stints, and then moved to Kansas City in our fleet management division about 1.5 years ago. And our government sector is really, really growing quickly. It's really happened over the last 2 to 3 years. We've started to do a lot more police vehicles in emergency response. That's not typically where we start our relationships. Like Nikki said, it's typically on the white fleet, 1/2 ton, 3/4 ton pickups, cargo vans, 1 ton trucks. We go up to 5,500 Series 5 vehicles, but typically where our value comes in is going to be the light and medium duty vehicles. So I just finalized a partnership with City of Raymore last month, almost to the day. We have partnerships in the last couple months with Leavenworth County, Saline County, Missouri, United Government, Wyandotte County. We're taking our program to council at Gladstone, and had a meeting with City of Independence outlining dates to go to council with them as well. So we've certainly had quite a few come on board. It's not your typical, dealership lease like most would have assumed. So it's very different. And what we do is we help anywhere from acquisition all the way through resale. So I'm going to share my screen with you all and kind of go through a really high level on what we put together. I'm not sure if anybody's had the opportunity to look through this or not, but basically, kind of given the background, non-emergency vehicles, 32. And, what we're trying to do is, in order to replace a heavy number of vehicles, is going to take either a lot of cash or to go out and purchase them outright, or you have the option to lease them. And so that's what most of our government partners do, is they'll take advantage of our equity lease, which I'll get into here in a minute. But that way you don't have to go out and outlay, $500,000 worth of cash to go be able to replace the vehicles that are needed to be replaced. So, ultimately being able to replace a large quantity of vehicles without the cash outlay, we still have the ability to build equity in those vehicles, which we ultimately get back to the city of Smithville at the end of each term for each vehicle. So, we've done a pretty extensive analysis that we've revised a few times now over the last year plus that we've been working on this project, and just kind of seeing the program from a 30,000-foot view, looking at the different buckets of vehicles. And to Nikki's point, the police vehicles certainly have a different use than the white fleet does. A lot more miles, a lot heavier driving. So we look at those very differently than we look at your typical white fleet. So we haven't included those into the analysis that we've done. But ultimately, what we're able to do is we're able to, I want to show you a couple slides from a high level to be able to take advantage of government, the government buy on the state bid or state contract to be able to go out and purchase vehicles. So, if you were to, our equity lease, here's how it works. Instead of your initial vehicle cost being $32,000 for a pickup truck, a 2020 Ford F-250 regular cab on a 5-year term doing 7,500 miles per year, instead of $32,000 acquisition price or $34,000 acquisition price through a state bid, state contract, you're going to be able to get that for $24,400. Instead of your traditional dealership lease where we finance it down to a $0 residual, we have you fund it down to a reduced book value or residual. So what happens is you have your monthly payments, in this example, $420 a month. Fast forward 5 years, vehicle with 32,000 miles on it, 5-year-old truck sells for $17,500. Very different than your traditional dealership lease where you would just turn the vehicle in and you wash your hands, you've had your payments, and you move forward with life. With our program, we give you the difference between the sales price and the residual on the vehicle. So in this example, $11,400 in equity. And so that's not our money, that's the city of Smithville's money. And so what we're able to do is once we start to give that money back, you're able to recognize those savings without having to outlay or front load all of that cash. One more slide I want to show you as it pertains to the government buying power. You know, again, if we're looking at a 2020 F-250 extended cab 4x4 truck, if we were to go out and buy this retail, it's probably going to cost us $36,000. But using the state contract, you're going to get that truck to be able to lease from Enterprise for $28,200. If we sell that truck 1 year old with 5,000 miles on it, you're looking at a sale price of $33,000 versus the acquisition price of $28,200. So you can literally sell it for more than what you bought it for. Now, this doesn't work with police vehicles for sure, because they've got a lot of upfitting in them, you know, several $1,000s worth of upfitting. Doesn't work with booms and cranes and spreaders and that kind of thing. But, you know, on your parks vehicles, as an example, that have minimal upfittings, we're meeting with you 2-3 times a year to be able to identify, hey, what are the opportunities where is the fleet at? Hey, here's where all your residuals are at. Here's what the market is showing us. You know, we recommend you do this to be able to maximize equity. And our theory is, hey, if we can continue to maximize equity and continue to lower your costs, you'll continue to hire us and order vehicles through us. So that's kind of how our program works. But and that's also how we've come to a lot of these conclusions in terms of we've got 1,100 different city and county governments that we work with across the country. But there's certainly a lot of data here that I'd be happy to answer questions on. We've got a case study from the city of Lenexa, who's been on our program for quite some time now, and they realize, you know, 6% total savings in their fleet, much more efficient vehicles, refreshed fleet every, you know, 3, 4, 5 years. And so they're really able to help maximize efficiency as well. So, you know, one other point I want to make is from a safety perspective, vehicles that are older than 2012 model year don't come with electronic stability control. And Highway Traffic Safety Administration has said that this is the most important safety feature since the invention of the seatbelt. So to be able to update the city's fleet again and make sure driving safe vehicles is typically very important to most of the cities and counties that we work with. But, you know, the market is constantly changing. So what we're seeing today is very different than what we saw 3 months ago, you know, once COVID-19 started happening. And we've got an entire team of people who are there to guide you and help you through the process and advise you on, hey, what's going to be best in terms of maximizing equity and reducing your expenses. Is it sell now? Is it, you know, sell later? And, you know, we buy and sell more than 1.1 million vehicles each year. So we are absolutely in tune with the market. We've got 19,000 different buyers across the country, mostly dealerships that we wholesale directly to instead of taking vehicles to auction. So that really helps us maximize the equity coming back to you. But we've got a ton of technology. We think it's important to be able to have that information readily available for fuel. How are we doing on fuel? How are we doing on maintenance, recalls? What is all of this costing me? So again, we meet with you several times throughout the year to be able to push all this information to you. But anybody has the ability within your organization to be able to pull that data from our website, so you can, you know, break down and you know, kind of go through those numbers yourself. But like I said, just to finalize a partnership with the City of Raymore. Dan, Brian Kidney says hello. Spoke with him today over at City of Independence, and we're going to be taking our program to board here over the next couple months. So obviously we've got some references and current partners, and that's a really, really brief crash course that I wanted to kind of walk you all through, but wanted to kind of hear what feedback do you have? What questions do you have? What concerns do you all have?
I want to say thank you to staff for the hard work on this. I know this has been a little over a year in pulling together. And I think the data kind of speaks for itself, and I appreciate all the work that's been done.
Yeah, good job, everyone. Anyone else have any comments, questions? Alderwoman Wilson, you're on mute. Melissa, you're on mute.
I should be fine now.
Yeah.
Just a question, like if we were to move forward with something like this and then see that it's not really working, what would be the process to move out of it?
Yeah, that's a great question. We don't have any sort of long-term commitment that you're required to stay with us for a certain amount of time. So basically the process would be each vehicle is going to have a reduced book value and you're going to be paying on the principal of that vehicle each month. So similarly, if you were to go out and go purchase a vehicle, from a dealership on state bid, you would just basically buy that vehicle out from us, and we send you the title and you fire us. So I know that was one of Dan's concerns. We talked, kind of extensively about the doomsday scenario and what happens if we want to get out, and that's a very common question that we get. So I don't know, Dan, if you want to elaborate at all on that.
Thank you.
I mean, that kind of leads pretty well into the funding scenarios that Dan will discuss anyways. And, that's kind of, we'll present to you options for how to fund this on an ongoing basis. And kind of in the most, one of the examples could be if we always want the fund, to have enough that if we ended enterprise that next year, we could afford to, purchase every vehicle and get back up to whatever fleet we had before. That would be one option that we can look at. And so if that's okay with everybody, maybe we'll kick it over to Dan to kind of walk through his scenarios.
Go for it, Dan.
I shared my screen first. Can everybody see it?
Yep.
Okay, I shared it and then I couldn't figure out where my mute button was. Okay, so I've included this spreadsheet. I've kind of done 3 different scenarios in the packet, but we'll kind of walk through it real quick. This is broken up by department. So development, Parks and Rec, the police vehicles that are not patrol. So these would be the chief, the captain, and the detectives have a vehicle that they share. The street department and the utilities department. These, the colors aren't great on my screen. I don't know how they are on everybody else's, but there's these negative dollar amounts kind of at the top. Those represent the sales or the proceeds from selling the vehicles that we currently own. Then we have these alternating colors of a 4-year lease here, followed by another 4-year lease here, followed by another 4-year lease, and this just keeps going out for a while. And then these negative dollars down here represent that equity that Brandon talked about earlier. So when you look at this in total, these numbers here are the expected or fair market value for selling the vehicles that we currently own. I think this represents like 11 in the first year and 7 here and then 2 or 1 or something like that. But these would be basically getting rid of the 27 vehicles that we're talking about replacing. Then these numbers here represent our annual lease payment. So you can see in the first year, we're not replacing all of our vehicles, only a portion of them. So that would be our annual lease payment. And then that kind of continues to grow until basically this number, where every year we're replacing the same amount of not replacing the same amount, but our lease payment, our annual lease payment kind of steadies out. And this is just an example. All these prices we know are going to change a little bit once their new pricing comes out in the fall. We know that we still might have some work to do to go back and say, well, instead of an F-250 here, we might only want an F-150 or maybe an F-350. So there's still a little bit of tweaking that could happen, or Enterprise might come to us and say, you know what, really the F-350s are doing much better on the resale market. You might want to do that instead of a Ford F-250. Or we might want to go with Chevys, or who knows what the case may be. So this is very much an example right now, not finalized. And then this number in the middle, that represents that equity coming back to us from when we sell vehicles at the end of the lease. And you can see that even in year one, the vehicles that we're going to sell, we anticipate we're going to receive about $126,000 for those. And our year one lease payment is only $122,000. So in year one, we don't need to do anything, and we're going to make $3,000 by going with this program. Then in the next year, we're going to sell our vehicles for $115,000. Some of the vehicles through enterprise that might be on that 1-year replacement schedule, we're going to get some equity back from those. And then we're going to have our lease payments for that year. So we're actually going to increase the fund balance. And that continues to happen basically as long as we still have vehicles to sell. And then once we don't have any more vehicles to sell, that number starts to drop off until we can't afford the program anymore. So that's kind of the first spreadsheet that you have from me that looks like this. The second spreadsheet you have is if we start with a transfer of $22,000 a year, that the fund balance still continues to grow quite substantially these first 4 years when we're selling vehicles, and then it kind of levels out. 210, 191, 224, 188, 206, 183, 211. Kind of it ebbs and flows a little bit, because there's different number of vehicles replaced every year, but for the most part, it stays pretty even. And that cash balance that this represents, on average, that's just under $200,000. That represents about 36% of what it would take to purchase that fleet outright if we decided in this year that we were done with this program, we wanted to get out of it. Alderwoman Wilson, this goes to your question. We know that we need somewhere in the area of $550,000 or $600,000 to just say we're going to stop, we're going to buy all of the vehicles that we're currently using and move forward with it that way. But we're only going to have about $224,000 in this fund, about 36% of what we need. So we'd have to find a way to fund the other $300,000 or $350,000 to do that. So that's where we start talking about this seed money. And I believe the third spreadsheet you have has $84,500 in each of these first 4 years. And what we're doing here is we're saying if we can contribute on top of the $22,000, $85,000 each of these first 4 years, then by the time we're done selling our vehicles, our cash balance is about that $550,000 that we would need to feel comfortable about choosing to stop this program after this year, or after this year, or after that year, or after that year. We have the cash available to do that. The real comfortability factor is, do we have the money to fund this over the first 4 years? Are we going to look at our finance? The discussion that we need to have with the board is this the goal that we want to have? We want to fund it so that by the time we're done selling vehicles, we have the cash balance to get out of this at any time we want? Or do we want to spread this seeding out over more years? If we did $40,000 a year, it would look something like that before we finally got to that 550-ish thousand number. But then we just have to know that if we get to this year and decide we're going to get out of it, and we need that 550,000, we only have 431. So are we comfortable if we make that decision, we're going to need to come up with the other 120 or reduce the number of vehicles that we want to purchase or something like that. So the last part of this conversation is do we want to try to fund this immediately, that 85,000 each of the 4 years? Do we want to fund this at a little smaller rate over time? And if it's a smaller rate over time, how many years do we want to take us to get there? 5 years, 8 years, 10 years, 15 years? Where's our comfortability factor? And again, keep in mind that all of these numbers are close, but there's still probably some tweaking in all of them.
So do you have a recommendation?
Well, I mean, as a finance person, I want to do it in the first four. You know, that's what way it makes me feel the most comfortable about it. But, you know, is there an opportunity to, you know, if we did it, let's say like it's planned out right here, and we're 120,000 short when we wanted to get out of it in this year, that's essentially not buying 4 or 5 vehicles. Could we live with 4 or 5 vehicles short on a temporary basis? Maybe. So maybe we are a little bit more comfortable with that. Also keep in mind, you know, if we do fund it in 4 years, then we have $500,000 that's just kind of sitting in a cash balance here. Obviously, we can take some of that and put it in CDs or things like that and gain a little bit more interest. But I think the right way to do it is look at funding it in the least amount of years as possible.
How much money are we saving each year with the lease plan?
That's not a very easy answer to question to answer, because right now our replacement schedule is really unorganized. It's all over the place. We have, I think in the staff report, it says 44% of our vehicles are over 10 years old. This plan, we would never have a vehicle over 4 years old. So to look at kind of, you know, what we're, you know, this number, this annual lease payment versus what we're doing right now, surely this is higher because we're not replacing 5 vehicles every year. But that's part of the problem, is because we're not replacing those vehicles on a regular basis, and the annual maintenance is increasing and the fuel efficiency is declining, and that's part of the equation as well.
Yeah, and to your point, we had that in the fleet planning analysis that we put together based on your make, model, series of all the vehicles in your fleet as compared to how other government entities through our partnership have extrapolated those numbers over. You're going to see a dramatic reduction in maintenance expenses. You're going to see a fairly healthy reduction in fuel expense as well. So also the cash outlay is, you know, you're certainly going to save some cash by, you know, instead of going out and purchasing vehicles, you're going to be leasing them. So yeah, smaller cash flow impact as well. So our projection is about $49,000 per year once the program is fully implemented. But we show an 8-year savings of $468,000 in the fleet planning analysis.
So that's about $50,000 a year we can put to seed money that we would already be spending.
Yeah, and a lot of that is going to be, you know, to Dan's point, is going to be coming out of the operating budget savings, because you're inherently going to switch from an 04 3/4 ton pickup truck to, you know, a 2020 pickup truck that we may cycle out every year. So you may do an oil change. Maybe that may be the only maintenance you have on it if we're getting rid of it every year, versus all the maintenance that's going to happen on an older pickup. So we're taking a lot, the lease payments on that, plus the fuel, plus the maintenance, and we're trying to, you know, meld all that together to be able to come up with the savings. But yeah, it's about $50,000.
What about insurance cost with newer vehicles?
Yeah, so we do anticipate an increase in that insurance cost. Now, our insurance is based on purchase value, though. So we do anticipate that that's going to increase some, but it won't increase drastically.
And one question I have that staff can probably just take and run with, but have you looked at electric vehicle options for those vehicles that might make sense?
We have looked, we are looking at electric or eco-friendly type vehicles for those areas that might make sense. There's a pro and con there because they don't have quite as good as a resale value. So we could definitely look at swapping some of these vehicles out for those, but it's actually going to hurt this fund a little bit.
Well, and I think that brings up a good illustration that ultimately this is our fleet and our choice. So if we wanted to tell Enterprise, we absolutely insist on having, 2 electric vehicles and we want all Fords, they will go with, the board's kind of requirements and our requirements. It just means that basically then your resale, equation may be completely different. So if we still have kind of, objectives on an annual basis of makes and models and types of vehicles that we want, that's still our choice. It just basically may not pay out in the same way that what they may recommend.
Yeah, that's a great
No,
point.
I would strongly lead to the fiscal conservative model at the moment, more than the eco-friendly.
Yeah.
But I will know that my electric vehicle that I bought secondhand was certainly not marked down very much.
And you have a huge fuel savings too, right? So maybe we look at the ones that are going north to south every day, like our utilities inspectors or code enforcement.
Yeah, that's all good points. And one thing that other cities do is the City of Independence has some electric vehicles, and they're looking at some hybrids with us. The hybrids seem to be a little bit more cost effective. The manufacturers typically will provide larger incentives on hybrids than they do the electric vehicles at this point. Once the technology is more prevalent, we'll continue to see those incentives very likely get more aggressive and larger as time goes on. But at this point, they just quite frankly are not as cost effective as pickup trucks and cargo vans and sedans and SUVs are at this point. But we do have a fair amount of hybrids.
And I think that's what we're suggesting is hybrid, not full electric.
Yeah, and we can do either. So,
And one last follow-up from me in regards to Alderman Blumker's question about what I would recommend. When we discuss the budget in August, we will have kind of a staff recommended plan for what these contributions look like to this fund, and we'll present that.
Perfect.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and stop this share so we can all see each other a little better here.
Any other questions for Enterprise while we have them online? All right, hearing none. Brandon, I think you're off the hook.
Nikki, I don't know if you want to touch base on this, but the plan will be to bring an agreement with Enterprise on, is it July 21st?
Probably August. The meeting's in
August.
August.
Okay.
Yeah, we're gonna have a light agenda on the 21st.
So that would be, kind of the next steps. If everything as presented seems agreeable, then we would present that this really is part of the budget process, because the budget would address the establishment of the fund. And then we for sure would like to know going into budget whether we're going down this path with Enterprise, so we know that we don't need to address, those vehicles as part of the budget process. So we would bring forward all the agreements that it would take with Enterprise, hopefully right before budget discussions. That way budget can really kind of reflect everything. The other thing with timing with Enterprise is, I guess you want to kind of pay attention to the manufacturer's timeline, and over time we'll get into a groove of kind of placing the order. You want to be kind of late summer or midsummer when those orders are being placed. That way you're kind of in line with all the vehicles that you prefer, and you don't make any payouts until they're received once the budget year has started. So the earlier that agreement is in place, the better potential maybe you have to get vehicles earlier and the ones that you want.
That's
Hey,
great.
as long as they're not purple or orange, we're okay with whatever you buy.
Get whatever color you want. Most go with white. One point I do want to make on that, Nikki, just for everybody's information, is we're kind of at a perfect time from our perspective in terms of moving forward with this program, because we anticipate we're going to get pricing and the order banks will open for the 2021 model year. And you always want to be at the front of the line because your lead times, it takes time to be able to build the vehicles exactly how you want, send the order to Detroit. Detroit actually builds and manufactures them exactly how you want. Then they ship them, and this isn't Amazon Prime, 2-day shipping. It takes some time to get there. And so we're starting to see some of the order banks open up, but they typically open up at the end of July, early August. Production typically begins end of August, September timeline. So we want to be at the front of the timeline, especially right now because the supply chain is so backed up because of COVID-19. We want to be at the front of the line because these vehicles are going to get bottlenecked, and it's just going to take more time to be able to get them to you. So
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Anything else? Nikki, Dan? Thank you, Brandon.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Assessment of utility late fees.
Okay, we'll talk here about late fees, and if depending on what the direction we receive from the board tonight, if there's any change in our normal practices, we will bring that as a resolution on July 21st. So I just wanted to be clear that the discussion that we're having we don't need to make the final decision, or you won't vote on the final decision later. We'll bring that back as a resolution in 2 weeks. But in short, due to COVID-19 and the emergency order for the mayor that was done back in March, we waived or suspended all utility late fees and did not perform disconnections in March or April. And then in May, we took a resolution to the board to basically extend that through the end of June. So now we're at a time frame where if we don't do anything else, we will assess a late fee on the 22nd of July, and we will do service disconnections on the 27th of July. So we wanted to have a conversation regarding that and see if the board wanted to return back to those normal billing practices, or if they wanted to change those normal billing practices temporarily, or if they wanted to full on delay either of those assessments longer than the June 30th deadline. And at the end of my staff report, I included some information on what some other cities are doing. And we got some confirmation today that those that are noted there are still accurate. And in fact, we got some additional information from Parkville that they have started to assess late fees in June, but they are not going to perform disconnects until August. So they've kind of gone a little bit of a different route where they've started those late fees already, and they just pushed back their disconnects a little while. So wanted to have that conversation, and there's a couple additional items in here where we chose to mail customers who were more than 1 month in arrears letters on May 22nd and June 30th. The May 22nd letters did have some positive results where 22 of the 105 customers that received the letter actually paid their balance in full. Another 26 had made a payment but still owed some of their current month's bill. Another 18 had made a payment but were still at least 1 month behind, and 34 we didn't receive any response from. On June 30th, we mailed 93, which is basically those 18 and 34 people or customers who also received a bill or a letter in May, and then 41 new customers who fell more than 1 month behind. That's not, the numbers that we're seeing are not super atypical. Usually when we assess late fees, there are about 400 fees assessed, or there are about 400 accounts who have a past due balance at that time. And when we pulled that data on June 22nd, which is when we would have assessed a late fee in June, there were 465 accounts. So just a little bit higher than what we would normally see, but not drastically higher. It wasn't double or anything even close to that. So we have some kind of proposed options. The board can choose to return to those normal billing practices, 10% late fee on the 22nd, and potential service disconnections for any accounts that are have a balance of in excess of $75. We can modify the late fee assessment or only charge it on people who owe more than a certain dollar amount. We can change or waive the disconnection of service that would be performed on the 27th, or we can suspend both the late fee and the disconnection through a further date. So looking for some direction from the board on which way they'd like to go.
I think Alderman Atkins had his hand up first, and then Alderman Blunker.
I do like the idea of staying with the way that Clay County is diagnosing the virus. As far as it's active and we're all still in quarantine, we need to take some consideration. However, I do like the idea of slowly getting back into the shut-off dates a little bit farther than the fees, like you suggested from one of the cities. Sooner or later, it has to come to an end, though.
Yeah, Alderman Blunker.
Mr. Mayor, I agree that we need to create a plan out of this and return to some sort of normalcy as it relates to this. I do, however, have a suggestion. In doing some research and taking a look at best practices, I came across an ICMA presentation which referenced use of CARES Act funding to create a utility bill forgiveness and fee waiver, and related to those who have been recently unemployed due to COVID-19, that could be an acceptable use of those funds. And I would like to see staff maybe do some research and bring that back with the proposal when we review this again.
Okay.
I second that. That sounds like an awesome idea. And I think that if we can, make that work, it would actually help those that really are impacted by this pandemic.
So one thing I would request also, Dan, of you and your team, if you could make a phone call to those people that are behind to see if they plan, if we do go forward with shutoffs again this month and late fees, if that impacts their ability to pay or set up a payment plan or some sort of, work with them. If they're accounts that are consistently late and behind prior to even COVID, that'd be some interesting data to have as well. So it doesn't sound like there's a lot of accounts. We have like 3,000 accounts, right? And it's only 34 that didn't respond. So
yeah, we sent out 3,604 bills in last week.
Yeah. So I know that there's plenty of times where I don't get my mail. So I use electronic water bills now for all of my accounts. So maybe just reach out to them, make sure they got it, make sure they're aware. Does anybody want to extend any longer on, let's just go with shutoffs first. Alderman Uladal.
I would recommend at least another August being when we reinstate shutoffs.
Yeah, it's kind of hot right now, right? Alderwoman Wilson?
I was going to say the same thing. I don't know if we could look at reinstating the late fees this month and waiting for shutoffs till next month.
Getting ahead of me. So, okay. So anybody else on shutoffs? I agree with Alderwoman Wilson. I think we should go ahead and start assessing late fees, but not shut off and give people the option if we get a hold of them to do some sort of, by the way, Dan, right now you're like perfect ghost of, or the ghost that visited before the three ghosts in Christmas Carol. Your wreath is right above your head. So yeah, so if we could do something with reaching out to them, give them the option to start some sort of payment plan or work on some terms, prior to assessing those late fees and let them know that shutoffs would be in August. Does anybody object to that? Chuck's
No,
direct.
and I think as you do that, you could probably find out what the circumstances are behind their lateness.
Right, because yeah, especially if we have 34 accounts and none of them are impacted due to unemployment or other reasons due to COVID, then staff goes and does the research on using the CARES funds, and we don't really have anybody who's eligible for it. So I think that'd be some good research for you to do, Dan. You got a couple folks that can make phone calls, right? Scott and John, any issues off the top of your head with using CARES funds for those, if we are able to do that?
We do need to take a look at it a little bit further. We've got some concerns. I know that some other cities are taking a look at the same issue. But it's something we'd like a little bit more time to visit. It's something that is clearly not specifically enumerated. The question is, can it fit into some category? And we'll take a look at that further.
Yeah, one other question I had for you all too. I'm glad John woke up from his nap. It looked like he was taking a good nap. Anyway, never mind. We'll move on. So for utility shutoffs, I know some of the private utilities, they have rules on temperature and things like that. Do we have any of that we're not currently, that we need to follow as well, or are those decisions made by those companies? So if it's over, average temperature 80, we don't shut off water or anything like that.
The only one that I'm aware of, and this is a little more abstract than that, it's basically it's more so in the winter when we physically cannot open the meter pit because it's frozen shut or because there's too much snow on top of it, then we don't do shutoffs.
Okay.
I guess there's a temperature minimum there too, but I don't know if it's freezing or if it's 0 degrees. I'm not entirely sure, but there's a temperature where we don't shut off as well.
Okay. So no maximum temperature, just a minimum.
No maximum.
All right. Cool. Any other questions? Give us a couple minutes. Anything else before we adjourn? I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Don't everybody raise their hand at once. Alderman Atkins.
Make a motion to adjourn.
You have a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. I'll see you. We stand adjourned. I'll see you guys in 28 minutes.
Hey, is it going to be on the same?
Yes,
thing?
it's the same meeting.
Okay.
Correct.
I'll just keep it up then.
On mute, turn off your video,
Yep.
play your guitar for a little bit.